Hello. So today we're going to reiterate some fundamentals of Ggplot. If you haven't used Ggplot before, you want to install the tidyverse as it is inside the tidyverse alongside other packages. And then you want to load said package using the library function. Once that's loaded, we have access to all the packages or sub-packages of the tidyverse. And I am following along the book R for Data Science, and we're going to continue forward with that in subsequent videos, breaking it down section by section and simple function by simple function. So you should look forward to those videos as well in the future. Hence why installing NC Flight 13, Gapminder, and Layman are listed here. We will not be using these in this video though, but keep an eye out for those in the future. So we will be using the MPG package, which is a pre-available package inside of R. You do not need to install this. And using Ggplot, we want to look at the fuel efficiency of cars with larger engines versus smaller ones. And if we want to take a look at this package first, we want to view it, MPG, and we can see in here you have manufacturer, model, display, year made, how many cylinders, the transmission, the drive, whether it's front wheel, four wheel, or rear wheel, the MPG for city versus highway, and the class of the vehicle, compact, mid-size, SUV, two-seater, etc. So that's what's within this data set that we will be manipulating. And we want to look at the display on the highway. So if we were going to type this, you want to do ggplot. It'll give you parentheses data equals MPG because we're accessing the MPG data set. And we're going to add, so put a plus sign, geom point, because we want to make a scatter plot or a point plot. Mapping. So what do we want to map into this plot with the aesthetic? This is going to distinguish your X and Y axis. X being this and Y being that. And once you have that complete, you can do Control, Return, or Enter on your keyboard to view the plot. And you can see it has a downward trend, but we can't really distinguish anything further from that. But before we try and discuss those aspects of the figure that we see, let's break down ggplot a bit further. Ggplot is a tool that uses coordinate systems to plot your data. You must specify what data and which variables within that data you want to plot. If you just specify the data set, it will return an empty graph. So if we want to prove that as a point, if you do ggplot data equals MPG and run it, you get an empty graph. We've told it nothing else. It's just saying, okay, we're looking at the MPG file, but we don't know what we're going to place on that graph because you haven't told me to. So all you've told the software is you want to look at the data set MPG, nothing else. This is showing you the first layer of the plot, and you must add additional layers in order to display your desired graph. And for this, use geoms, hence geom point. There are additional geoms, AB line, area, bar graph, box plots, contour plots, crossbar, curves, densities, etc. But today we're just going to be using geom point. And what might come of that if we run this line? Well, you get an error message because you haven't set any aesthetics. It says error in check required aesthetics. So it knows you want to make a point, or a scatter plot, but it doesn't know yet what you're wanting to do with the data. And GeoPoint will add points as a layer to create a scatter plot. It still does not know which variables you want to use or compare for on this plot. For this, we must use the aesthetic function to specify those variables. So adding another layer to this, data equals MPG plus GeoPoint. Aesthetic, you don't necessarily need mapping equals aesthetic. You can just use aesthetic. X is disp and Y equals highway. And this brings us back to the plot we just saw. But it does not really distinguish the kinds of vehicles that have certain highway mileage. So therefore, assigning colors to the class of the car can further distinguish these types of vehicles on the plot. Typing this out again, Ggplot data equals MPG plus GeoPoint, the aesthetic X display, or the amount of liters in that vehicle versus highway mileage. But we want to see what class of vehicle sits where on the plot. So color equals class, and it assigns colors to these points. Now, taking another moment to look at this a little bit longer, we can see that as your highway mileage decreases, you're moving into subcompacts, pickups, and SUVs. But there is this upward trend that you see here where you have two-seater vehicles. So these cars have larger engines, but they are smaller, so they might have better mileage. Colors are a great way to portray your results, but can still be limiting to an audience. So perhaps you have an audience member that is colorblind. Perhaps you can't print in color, or maybe these subsequent options are viable and useful as well. We will discuss colorblind friendly color palettes in additional videos. So instead of using color equals class, say you can't print in color, you can do alpha equals class, and this changes to different shades of that black and white point. As you can see here, it distinguishes the class by the various shades of said points. Well, there might be some issues in that. Perhaps your printer isn't working well. It can be difficult to see, and so on and so forth. This is a good way to do this if you perhaps can't publish in color, or you might have other limiting factors, but there are additional factors you can use. Instead of alpha equals class, maybe you want to change the shape of each point. So you do the same line, but you just change instead of alpha equals class, you do shape equals class. And it assigns a different shape to those classes. But oh, you notice here, SUV has no assigned shape. Why might that be? Well, you got to look at the warning sign provided. The shape palette can deal with a maximum of 6 discrete values because more than 6 becomes difficult to discriminate, and we have 7. So you either need to find a color palette that works, choosing alpha equals class, or perhaps you need to look up further shape options and manually input them. So again, to reiterate that, Ggplot2 will only use 6 shapes at a time. If you have more variables than this, they will go unplotted. Okay, that is a very brief introduction to Ggplot and a scatter plot more specifically. I encourage you to use your data and consider these sorts of variables and ways to run it. If you like this video, leave a like, consider subscribing, and leave your questions and comments below.